Welcome to the New World Order. You will do as you are told. Do not rock the boat. Do not question authority. Toronto Police, you are as much victims of this global empire as we are. The true criminals you want to arrest are within the Summit exclusion zone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Love Police. We are the true authority here. We ask the Toronto Police to hand over your truncheons and your tear gas guns. You are making a terrible mistake. You have been misguided by the global elites. You think we are your enemy. Your enemy are your puppet masters at the top of your hierarchy of control. Welcome to the surveillance state. Welcome to the destruction of civil liberties for the pursuit of profit. You are all potential terrorists in the face of the New World Order. And this is a special message to the guy just there in the black paramilitary uniform holding a MP5 submachine gun. Sir, why have you brought a live-firing weapon to a peaceful protest? Why is the government trying to antagonize peaceful people by bringing live weapons to a protest?
I'm Paul from WeAreChangeVictoria.org. I'm here with Robert Menard, Freeman on the Land, Chief of Peace for the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers. Hey, Rob, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here.
Great, great. So we're here in Victoria. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's a September weekend, and we're here talking with Rob a little bit about an initiative that he's got going on. It's called the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers. So, Rob, tell us a little bit about what you have going on here.
Well, essentially what I realized is that we have an apparent problem with what's happening in the government and with the police. They seem to be out of control, and since they're not policing themselves, I believe that there's a requirement and a necessity for the people to do it. So what we do is, using the law and using the definition of a peace officer in the Criminal Code of Canada, we are establishing a corps of just everyday ordinary people across Canada who swear oath or make a testament and enter into contract to be peace officers and to monitor police officers if necessary and videotape them, bring charges and correct the situation, kind of balance it out a little bit. So it's essentially just getting people to stand up and say, yeah, I'm a peace officer too. They swear to preserve and maintain the public peace, and at that point they are no longer seen legally as a child being corrected by the cops who are acting as a babysitter. They're now the police of the police.
We see people videotaping around here. We want to make sure what their intentions are.
Yep. Our intention is to provide some alternative information to people who are looking to learn about the G20, as opposed to the mainstream media slant on things. Are you familiar with what an agent provocateur is? Well, in Montebello, Quebec in 2007, there was 3 police officers who were dressed as aggressive protesters with rocks in their hands, wearing masks, in an attempt to incite violence.
These 3 guys are cops, everybody!
George, as a representative of the Toronto Police, can you assure us that the Toronto Police Force will not engage in any police agent, provocateur agent activities at the G20 summit?
Security matters, I'm not at liberty to discuss those that are open for that. Obviously, with these people coming to town, this is a huge international event. It puts Toronto on the global stage. We obviously have to take the steps that we deem necessary to provide that protection for them to visit Canada.
What is the purpose for having the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers? Like, what is the general reason why this is happening?
Because the police, because they're hired to do 2 jobs. One's they're peace officers, but they are also policy enforcement officers and revenue collectors a lot of the time. Because of this, they go overboard and they act contrary to the Criminal Code of Canada when they're fulfilling their other task. And since they're the only ones who are at present empowered to investigate and bring charges against people doing that, they're not going to do it to themselves, so they're getting away with things which, if anyone else tried it, you would end up facing criminal charges. They routinely use mischief, extortion, intimidation. They pervert the course of justice by threatening to arrest people for failure to produce government-issued ID. They often engage in unlawful arrests, and I think that we as a populace have to deal with this before they get too out of hand, because otherwise we're hooped.
Yeah, but you're not suggesting that every cop is like this, though. That every police officer is like this, right?
Of course not. Of course not. We all know there's good officers out there, and people are people, and generally I think people do the best they can with the information available to them and with their ability to process it. I see a problem with a police state developing in Canada, but I think part of the remedy is to actually empower the police further and empower them to say no to unlawful orders and be free to follow their hearts. I think by us standing and just saying we're watching you, and if you cross the line and you engage in criminal action, there will be consequences. They will be empowered to say no to these unlawful orders, and they'll be happier about it. Plus, when it all boils down to it, they're people. They want to get home safe. They want to be treated with respect while they're on the job, and when they're dealing with a sworn peace officer, both of those things are pretty much assured. So although it might stop them from engaging in actions which they might be accustomed to now, it certainly makes for a safer environment for everyone, and it should make their jobs a lot easier.
So in essence, to get this straight, it's almost like who's policing the police in a way, who's watching the watchdogs.
Exactly.
And at the same time, it's more about what you said many times, it's about growing up on an adult level, right?
I agree with that. I think, to me, I don't see any reason why the vast majority of adults out there haven't stood up and sworn oath and gotten hired, even just for $1, to preserve and maintain the peace and present themselves as a peace-loving individual who is not a threat to our existence. And I think at that point we gain a certain level of respectability, responsibility, and power, especially if you end up in court. As it is now, you go before the courts. If you've got a problem with a police officer, it's one peace officer versus a child of the province, essentially. By becoming peace officers ourselves, we can then meet them on even ground, and our testimony will carry just as much weight as theirs. It also gives us the power to film them while they're engaging in these actions, and do it knowing that they aren't going to be able to come and arrest us for obstructing a peace officer in the performance of their duties or ordering us to leave. At that point, we can claim, no, we are the peace officer, we're the ones fulfilling our duties, and you're the ones trying to obstruct us. And I think they would be far less likely to try to hinder us in our collection of evidence to be used in court.
What brought you to this understanding that you have?
Well, essentially it started with the Occupy movement. I was watching that unfold across the world, and I realized that there were hundreds of different issues that people were complaining about. And these seemed to me to be kind of like the symptoms of a disease and not the disease itself. So I started looking. Harbor Air. Fly Harbor Air. So I started looking at what the problems seemed to be, and it seemed to me that all of the problems that people were facing boiled down to essentially 5 different issues, that if we were to address those, we would have the tools we need to address all of the other problems, or many of the other problems would simply be alleviated or wouldn't exist anyways. And the 5 issues that I saw was the first one, and this is very difficult to share with people. Most people refuse to accept that they even need to do this, but people need to grow up. We have to stop dividing ourselves based upon such arbitrary things like gender, religion, political ideology. All of these things to me are ludicrous. We might as well divide ourselves based on the color of our socks. The other problem that we have is because we are acting essentially legally in the position of a child of the province, we are not seizing our wealth. And we need to be able to seize our wealth and administrate it properly for ourselves, for our benefit, and for future generations. The second major problem I see has to do with our system of government. As far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely archaic. It's, 800 years old. We now have technology available that was never available back then. When it was created, their highest means of communication was a passenger pigeon. We now have the technology available, so we shouldn't have to be electing people every 4 years. We know they've all sold out to the corporations. They're no longer representing us or our wills. And it's funny, but they're never going to be the ones to suggest, hey, our positions are archaic and you can do it with a computer logarithm and a couple of programs. They don't want that to be known. We need a more direct form of democracy where as individuals we can raise, deliberate, determine, and then act for these common goals and issues. And whether it be marijuana being decriminalized, fracking, whatever, we decide what those issues are instead of electing professional politicians to do it for us. And well, the remedy for the second problem, what I would see happening is a People's Congress where we use direct democracy and we have sessions where we decide these issues. It wouldn't be that difficult to structure something that would allow us to do that. The third problem that I see is our courts. If you want courts, it must be because you want justice. If you want justice, you have to have truth. If you have fictions in court, you're not going to have any truth. The moment you let fictions in the courtroom, truth is jumping out the windows, running and trying to find a place to hide in the hills. You can't have that. We need courts where only people have a voice. There are no legal fictions for anyone to hide behind, and everyone is responsible for their own actions. A people's court where only people have voice would give us the powers to deal with many of these corporations that we find suffering injustice at their hands. The fourth problem I see is the fact that our peace officers are no longer acting as peace officers. They're engaging in clearly violent and unlawful activities, and there's no one to hold them in check. The remedy for that I see is the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers, where we do act as peace officers. We rise up, and they know that we can essentially make them obsolete and unnecessary. The fourth problem, of course, is money. Or the fifth problem, the final one, is money. We demand too much of our money, I believe, because we ask it to fulfill two counter roles. One is as a medium of exchange so that we can engage in trade, and the other one is as a store of wealth. And when you have it used as both, you end up with people who hoard it and who have a vested interest in ensuring that there's a minimum amount of it out there available, because that raises their perceived value of what they're hoarding. You can't have your money do both of these two things simultaneously. You end up with hungry people walking by restaurants that are going out of business, and there's got to be a way for us to put money in circulation without interest attached to it that we owe to the banks, which continually depletes the resources, and it allows the banks to collapse the money supply, claim all the real wealth that is out there and accumulated, and do it over and over until mathematically they end up owing everything. So these are the 5 problems that I think we as a nation need to address. And if we could address these things, we could actually create a world of untold abundance and peace where everyone is pretty much encouraged to find and follow their own passion and to bring that forth in a manner that doesn't harm. I kind of sense that there is a growing consciousness, a growing unity, a growing sense of awareness, and people starting to look at the rat race and say, this is not what I'm here for. So I believe that people are kind of growing up as it is. They are awakening to their true spiritual potential, their divine nature.
Yeah, because that's what I've seen lately is a lot of people do want to help. They do want to help out society. They want to continue to be a human and look past all the status and everything else. I think it's an important concept that you have, that we incorporate civilized people to start acting a little bit more mature, taking upon responsibility, because we're always going to have conflict. There's always going to be conflict in the world, but the question is do we have to be violent about it? Do we have to be forceful about pushing our ways and our ethics throughout the world or even on a local community?
I would argue whether or not there's really even a need for conflict. I think most people conflict, it seems to me, is almost always a result of one party or two feeling that they have been denied a measure of dignity which was due or which they felt was due. And I have found that conflict is almost always resolved the moment they start to see that someone is at least trying to give them the dignity that was due. And I think once the spiritual growth reaches a critical kind of mass and the unity becomes just a given instead of, oh, it's a new thing, we're less likely to act in a manner that brings someone else an indignity. We're less likely to exist in conflict. And I think a lot of the conflict comes from frustration. And if people are just free to follow their passions and live their goals and do it where we have a system where maybe people are recognized for the gifts that they give and not the money that they've hoarded, and that these people are recognized as the rich ones. I think you could find that the need for conflict would diminish incredibly. You wouldn't need it.
But the basis of the Canadian Common Core peace officers is basically a non-violent, non-aggression concept of helping your community, helping the police when they need it the most, and protecting us from a police state that is approaching us. So Rob, I really do like this concept of the Canadian Common Core peace officers. My question would be, though, is how does it actually benefit the community, my community, not Ottawa, not Winnipeg? How does it benefit my community? And how are you going to prevent wackos and nut jobs from signing this oath, this declaration, and then perhaps spoiling the fun?
Well, first part, the benefit to your community is going to be that you will have people from your community who are standing and acting as peace officers, helping to bring peace to your community. If everyone in your community would do this, your need for police would plummet, and you would save money on your policing costs. Also, it's a line of defense against a potential police state descending on everybody's community. So I think that's the major benefits of that. Ensuring that we don't hire wingnuts and wackos, as you said. We are going to have a vetting process where the way we look at it, we can't vet everyone, and it's not really for us to judge. But what we can do is vet one person from that community, give them a charter, and then it's up to them to hire the people, accepting responsibility for who they hire until they've got one precinct or one detachment to the whole. And the goal is to end up with these throughout communities across Canada, all operating under or with the support of one central authority, which they compose, which they, provide the leadership to, and which is all operating under an umbrella of civilian oversight with an elected committee elected by the public at large, so that they know that along with a police officer force across the country, we also have a peace force across the country, and that these peace officers have the power to record and bring criminal charges to bear against police officers if they cross the line. And I don't see how that's a negative thing at all. I mean, the idea of having police who are not held accountable to the law, to me, that's a scary thing to have under any circumstance in any country. So I really see the need for us to rise up and take our power and be able to police these police officers and tell them this is the line and you don't cross it.
But it's based on a peaceful, non-violent action.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not talking about picking up guns and bringing forth any sort of violent movement like an American militia group or anything like that. Our peace officers would be armed with pen and paper and a recorder, but easily identified as peace officers and able to record and then testify and prosecute people for breaching the Criminal Code of Canada. So I'm not looking at bringing, violence to bear in any way, shape, or form. I just want the ability to record them when they're engaging in unlawful activity and bring that information to court for the courts to deal with lawfully.
We're seeing a surveilled society everywhere we look. We're seeing cameras. Everywhere you go, there's a camera watching you. So in essence, we're kind of making a surveillance of the civilians over the surveillors.
That's right. And the thing is, if the police have nothing, if they aren't doing anything wrong, they shouldn't have anything to fear about us videotaping them. And we should be able to do so from the perspective and with the status of a peace officer and all of the protections and rights and duties that affords.
Yes, I would like to clarify, though, that freedom doesn't come free. Freedom is synonymous with respect. So the same amount of respect that you have for other people and yourself is the same amount of freedom that you'll find. So it's important to respect those of authority. It is important to respect those, everybody, and it's important to respect yourself so that we have a peaceful community. You say this is legal, this is lawful, this is something we can do?
Look at the definition of peace officer in the Criminal Code of Canada, and you'll find that amongst the definitions there is any person who is hired to preserve and maintain the public peace. And all we're doing is hiring each other in small groups to preserve and maintain the public peace, avoiding a top-down hierarchy where there's a central power, so each community is served by the members within it. And who's best to serve your community than yourselves? And we've got to stop asking for the government to fix our problems for us, especially when they seem to be creating it so that they can empower themselves and come up with reasons for eroding our rights. So what I see is a need for that, and I think it would be a huge benefit to our communities.
So if we saw something like the riots in Vancouver, or perhaps the G20 that we saw in Toronto last year, how do you think, if perhaps half the population there were peace officers, how do you think the outcome would come? How do you think the outcome would be if, in fact, we all were peace officers during that event?
I think it would have been, I don't think the cops would have come out the way they did. They would have known that there was a line of peace officers standing. They would have had to go through those peace officers. That would have been obstructing a peace officer in the performance of their duties. It's a very serious charge. And the peace officers would have been in a legal position to defend themselves and start arresting them. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. You know, no one wants the violence, but it's the cops. I mean, we have protests and the cops show up in riot gear. Who is it who's looking for a fight? Clearly it's them. And in G20 you see them running around with gas masks. They've all taken their name tags off. They're unidentifiable. They're wearing a mask not because there's any gas, but because it's a mask, and they're running around beating people with sticks. At that point, you need to be able to mark them in some way, take their pictures, and then round them up and bring criminal charges to bear against them.
Without warning, that whole line of fully seated riot cops ran toward us at full speed, the bike cops included. Within a matter of seconds, they were on my heels yelling, "Go faster, you're going to get hurt, go faster, we're going to gas you." And it made me feel a way that I've never felt before in my own country. I was absolutely afraid of the police.
Then without warning, they started advancing and grabbing people randomly, and they started sending horses into the crowd, where at least a few people were injured. One woman was trampled, I believe her leg was broken. Somebody else I saw get kicked by one of the officers on the horse. And of course, you know, they just started advancing and grabbing people randomly and then advancing more, and without ever communicating to us why they were doing it. There was never any order to disperse from Queen's Park issued. Myself and other people kept yelling at the police, asking for somebody to come forward that speaks for the police to communicate why they were doing what they were doing, why they were starting to become aggressive with us. But there was never any negotiator or anybody stepped forward. It seemed like it was just something that was taking on a life of its own.
Some of the photos and videos that have gone on Facebook seem to show people dressed in black attire going behind a police line. And if that's an option that was taken, they need to explain why. They need to explain who made that decision. And if the Canadian public don't want to see that on their soil, they have to put measures into place that'll never be repeated again.
If we don't accept responsibility for the things like G20, because we're not standing as peace officers against it, we are just as responsible as the police if a police state develops. And I think we owe it to future generations to ensure that doesn't happen.
Now, to many viewers, this is going to seem a little bit foreign, this conversation that we're having, but believe me, most of the media doesn't tell you what's really going on in the world, and it doesn't really describe what's really happening around the world. There's a lot of people using the term loosely, waking up, understanding that there's serious problems in the world that can be fixed, that are known to be manufactured. What is the end goal to all this, Rob, for the C3 or for the Canadian Common Corps peace officers?
Well, the end goal is a nation of peace and abundance for everyone. And for the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers, what I'd like to see, as I said, was a series of these units across the country in every community, made up and formed by the members of their community with an elected civilian oversight looking after it, so that we leave our kids a legacy of cops who are under control instead of running amok.
One of the things that I've noticed you mentioned about was how there's new legislation that is slowly encroaching upon almost treason, and that's having police officers from the States allowed to cross into Canada and actually have some jurisdiction. What do you think about that?
I think that's treason, whoever allowed that. I think we fought wars to stop that. They should not be crossing that border and exercising police powers at all. Here's what I see them doing with that. Their argument is they need to be able to do this because they're chasing people across the border and they're getting away crossing that border. They've obviously never heard of radios. They could easily just radio ahead, and if we need more cops on this side to deal with that, then we hire more cops on this side to deal with that. But to allow them to cross the border like that, and they'll start off slow, they'll say it's only when we're chasing someone and only the first 5-10 kilometers, and then they're going to expand that until it's 100, it's 200, it's 500 kilometers, and then they'll say, well, chasing someone administratively during an investigation is the same as a physical chase, and then they'll justify crossing the border at that point. And once you let that camel get its nose in the tent, it's going to take over your whole bed and you're going to be flea-ridden. We've got to stop this now. One of the things the Canadian Common Corps is doing is seeking an injunction in federal court, barring the U.S. cops from doing this until there is a judicial determination to determine whether or not it's even legal and lawful. And I'd be willing to bet it's neither.
Because that's a slippery slope. That's a very slippery slope when you start allowing the lifting of a border. Just imagine if you took your fence and you removed it from your neighbor. At what point do you think it would become a little bit confrontational?
Not only that, imagine you took your fence and moved it 20 feet into your neighbor's yard and then said, this is my fence now, and then kept moving it until you have absorbed his entire property. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, so it's essential that we look at history, look at why Canada was formed, why we have borders, and in my opinion, I think it's good to have borders, and I think it's good to a good nation is built on good provinces are built on good communities, and it comes right back down to the community. And that's what us here at Freedom Free for All, we try to establish time and time again, that it's this community involvement and engagement that is actually going to make a huge change in this world. We say, be the change you want to see, and that's what we're trying to do. Well, Rob, it was great having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Good to be here.
Yeah, that's great. Let's get back to your sailing here.
Okay.
All right.
Welcome to the new world order. You will do as you are told. Do not rock the boat. Do not question authority. Toronto Police, you are as much victims of this global empire as we are. The true criminals you want to arrest are within the summit exclusion zone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Love Police. We are the true authority here. We ask the Toronto Toronto Police to hand over your truncheons and your tear gas guns. You are making a terrible mistake. You have been misguided.
Be peace officers and to monitor police officers if necessary and videotape them, bring charges and correct the situation, kind of balance it out a little bit. So it's essentially just getting people to stand up and say, yeah, I'm a peace officer too. They swear to preserve and maintain the public peace, and at that point they are no longer seen legally as a child being corrected by the cops who are acting as a babysitter. They're now the police of the police.
We see people videotaping around here. I want to make sure what their intentions are.
Yep. Our intention is to provide some alternative information to people who are looking to learn about the G20, as opposed to the mainstream media slant on things. Are you familiar with what an agent provocateur is? Well, in Montebello, Quebec in 2007, there was 3 police officers who were dressed as aggressive protesters with rocks in their hands, wearing masks, in an attempt to incite violence.
These 3 guys are cops, everybody!
George, as a representative of the Toronto Police, can you assure us that the Toronto Police Force will not engage in any police provocateur agent activities at the G20 summit?
Security matters, I'm not at liberty to discuss those that are open format. Obviously, with these people coming to town, this is a huge international event. It puts Toronto on the global stage. We obviously have to take the steps that we deem necessary to provide that protection for them to visit Canada.
What is the purpose for having the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers? Like, what is the general reason why this is happening?
Because the police, because they're hired to...
Hey, Rob, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here.
Great, great. So we're here in Victoria. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's a September weekend, and we're here talking with Rob a little bit about an initiative that he's got going on. It's called the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers. So, Rob, tell us a little bit about what you have going on here.
Well, essentially what I realized is that we have an apparent problem with what's happening in the government and with the police. They seem to be out of control, and since they're not policing themselves, I believe that there's a requirement and a necessity for the people to do it. So what we do is, using the law and using the definition of a peace officer in the Criminal Code of Canada, we are establishing a corps of just everyday ordinary people across Canada who swear oath or make a testament and enter into contract.
By the global elites. You think we are your enemy? Your enemy are your puppet masters at the top of your hierarchy of control. Welcome to the surveillance state. Welcome to the destruction of civil liberties for the pursuit of profit. You are all potential terrorists in the face of the New World Order. And this is a special message to the guy just there in the black paramilitary uniform holding a MP5 submachine gun. Sir, why have you brought a live-firing weapon to a peaceful protest? Why is the government trying to antagonize peaceful people by bringing live weapons to a protest?
I'm Paul from wearechange.victoria.org. I'm here with Robert Menard, Freeman on the Land, Chief of Peace for the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers. Hey.